Away. Good morning, welcome to the program. A political shouting match has erupted over the issue of child sex abuse in the Northern Territory. During his visit to Alice Springs this week, the opposition leader Peter Dutton said he'd heard damning stories from police and social workers about the abuse and neglect of Aboriginal children. Labor has accused him of using the issue as a political football. One Labor minister even labelled his claims a, quote, dog act. He was asked by an ABC journalist to produce the data to back up his claims. So what does the data say? We've obtained the latest statistics from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and they paint a damning picture for the Northern Territory. Let's go live to Matt Cunningham now in Darwin. Matt, what do the numbers say?
Well, they're not good. They're certainly not good from a Northern Territory point of view, Laura, and this should probably be as no surprise. We've reported on these issues extensively here for many years. 5 years ago, you and I were in Tennant Creek reporting on this very same issue following the rape of a 2-year-old girl in that town. We know that following that incident, there was a Children's Commissioner's report that found that girl and her family had been the subject of 52 separate notifications to child protection authorities and police, and yet nothing had been done to keep her safe. Let's look at this data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and this shows that when it comes to child protection notifications or investigations, they are significantly higher, up to 5 times higher in the Northern Territory than anywhere else. New South Wales, there are 23 per 1,000 head of population, Victoria 21, Queensland 19.8, Western Australia 19.2. In the Northern Territory, 95.5 child protection notifications and investigations per 1,000 head of population. Perhaps more damningly, Laura, have a look at this statistics. This is substantiated child abuse by age group. And when it comes to children under 1 year old, the national average is 16.6 per 1,000 head of population. In the Northern Territory, that number is 63.8. When it comes to children 1 to 4 years old, the national average is 9.2. In the Northern Territory, it is 26.6. The trend continues for children aged 5 to 9 years old, the national average 8.2. In the Northern Territory, 22.7. And for children aged 10 to 14 years old, the national average 8.4. And in the Northern Territory, 25.9. So, I mean, the data doesn't lie, Laura. The numbers are significantly higher here in the Northern Territory than they are anywhere else in the country. It doesn't break those numbers down for Aboriginality, but we know that it is Aboriginal women and children who suffer significantly higher rates of abuse than their non-Indigenous counterparts. It should also be noted that the rates of substantiations in the Northern Territory are somewhat lower than they are in some other states, whether that's because reports are being made that turn out not to be true, or whether there's an overwhelmed and overworked Child Protection Department. We are not sure, but that Child Protection Department has certainly had its issues in the past trying to keep up with the volume of work it has to deal with. You spoke in your introduction about the political shouting match that's going on right now. There's no doubt that's the case. Here's what the Northern Territory's Minister for Police and Territory Families, Kate Worden, had to say yesterday afternoon in response to Peter Dutton raising these issues.
What we've seen over the last couple of days from Peter Dutton in Central Australia is absolutely opportunistic game playing, political game playing, and using the most vulnerable people here in the heart of our nation in Central Australia as a pawn in that game. It's quite frankly a dog act.
Those comments prompted a sharp response from the Northern Territory Country Liberal Party Senator Jacinta Price, who of course lives in Alice Springs. She spoke to Paul Murray here on Sky News last night. Here's what she had to say.
You only have to speak to individuals who have listened, who have been speaking to Dutton over the last couple of days, and they've been in tears. They're like, thank God, actually somebody in a leadership position is listening to us, is prepared to fight on our behalf. And all Labor can say in that is accuse us of politicising this issue, when in fact they are doing that by suggesting that in the first place. That is all they've got. I can guarantee you, I am fielding calls, I am having conversations with people who know what's going on. There's frontline workers who can't talk about what's going on.
Laura, I've spoken to many people over the past 7 or 8 years who tell a similar story to the one Jacinta Price is telling there. The last time I was in Alice Springs, I was actually at the hotel and had a doctor come up to me and say he wanted to discuss some of these issues. I think he spoke for about 10 minutes without drawing breath about some of the issues he was seeing at the Alice Springs Hospital, being confronted with at that hospital. He was talking about issues involving the abuse and neglect of Aboriginal children. We reported on this at the time. He said they were seeing children present at the hospital whose parents were so drunk they were unable to look after them. He talked about the sexual assault of children as well that they were having to deal with at that facility. So there's no doubt, I think, that people on the ground know that this is an issue. They're trying to deal with this issue on the front line. But as we are seeing, we're now sort of evolved into this political shouting match after Peter Dutton raised those issues in Alice Springs this week. Yeah,
that's right, Matt. And you talk about the things that are actually so heinous you can't report them. We've spoken to Kerry Joy on this program as well, who's a former police officer in Alice Springs, and he spoke about one case that still haunts him, and he couldn't do it without welling up and crying. And this is about, you know, a repeat offender who he then found had this individual had then gone on to rape a 10-month-old baby. So we're not talking about this as isolated incidents, Matt. The political stoush over this and the reaction from the Northern Territory government, to me, is pretty breathtaking. They have the data now that you've given us this morning, but why isn't the anecdotal evidence enough?
And it's not just anecdotal either, Laura. I reported on a case late last year from a remote community in Central Australia. This was a case that went through the courts in the Northern Territory. These were the words of a judge talking about what had happened in this case. Not anecdotal. This is real evidence in a court in the Northern Territory. It involved a 12-year-old girl who was raped in a community by a 23-year-old man. That girl presented at the Alice Springs Hospital with her mother and 2 other carers for an abortion. The carers talked the doctors at the hospital out of performing that procedure, saying they would look after this girl. They failed to do so, even though they received the Centrelink payments. That girl was basically abandoned by those people who were supposed to care for her. She wasn't taken into the care of Territory Family. She was placed in the care of an uncle who did the same thing, took the Centrelink payments, but basically neglected this 12-year-old girl. In the end, it was the nurses from the community who looked after this 12-year-old girl, who then had to give birth at the age of 12 to a baby in horrific circumstances. Now, that case went through the courts here in the Northern Territory last year. We reported on it late last year. It received almost no media attention other than that. But that is a damning example of what's happening here.
Matt, thanks so much. Appreciate it.